the county. And prior to working for Cooperative Extension, I was down there from 2001 to 2012. Prior to that, I was a commercial arborist down there. And then in Canada, prior to that, I'd worked for Domtar Forest Products in the Forestry Services Division. So that was a lot of fun doing regeneration surveys, and we worked a lot with hybrid poplar plantations. So some of you upstate New York folks would remember the plant in Cornwall, Ontario. So that's where I used to work whenever I was a student. All right, so let's go through a little presentation here that we put together, that I put together about volunteers and working with urban foresters. And of course, I just want to give a little context because I'm now across the state line over here in Massachusetts. And so in Massachusetts, we are actually ranked second nationally in terms of urbanization. So the vast majority of our state residents, over 90% of our state residents, are located in and around urban centers. So we are considered to be one of the most populated, densely populated states in the nation, besides New Jersey. And in terms of urban growth, we are fourth nationally. And maybe you can mute everyone, Ryan, if you would. I hear some rattling around, which is fine. I have kids that rattle around, but it distracts me a little bit. All right, so we have, in terms of tree cover, we have substantial statewide tree cover. We're sort of like, kind of like parts of upstate New York, where we have our land cover reverting to forest cover because people are quote unquote moving off the land, right? That's because people are sort of no longer practicing small scale forestry, and they are no longer farmers and all of those kinds of things. However, on the other side of that, in Massachusetts, there's a lot of interest in enhancing our urban canopy tree cover. So in Boston, we have the Grow Boston Greener initiative, which is attempting to up, of course, the urban tree canopy cover. There in Worcester, we have the Worcester Tree Initiative. And of course, in Springfield, well, we have a lot of things going on in Springfield, but the 3,000 energy trees that went in whenever I had started back 2012 to 2000, I think they finished that all in one season, 2012, 2013. So there's a lot of interest locally here in Massachusetts in terms of enhancing urban tree canopy cover. And so what that means for us is basically we just sort of inherently inherit a urban forest, or at least the interest in urban forestry is there. And of course, I'm going to throw out a couple of terms just so folks can take a look at them. And if you take a look at a fact sheet in the future or some sort of literary resource in the future and you see socio-ecological systems, you can at least say you heard it mentioned. So I'm not going to get into this entirely in great detail, but what we're essentially talking with those first 2 points, the juncture of socio-ecological systems, where we have biophysical and social elements, is basically we have human interests or human ecology. And of course, we have natural interests like the trees and the grass and the insects and those sorts of things. So that's what we mean when we say that we're at the intersection of basically human interests and environmentalist interests, as well as, of course, other physical factors, like we're looking right here at a building. And so that's right here in the UMass campus. That's the Du Bois Library. And of course, we see lots of hardscaping and lampposts and all of those kinds of things. And there's great complexity where these sorts of factors intersect with one another. And our field is sort of replete with examples of these. And one of the things we want to drive home is that urban forestry is pretty recent. It really wasn't defined until the 1960s, 1970s, at least in a contemporary sense, by Dr. Eric Jorgensen from the University of Toronto. He was a pathologist up there who worked on Dutch elm disease. And of course, inherently that brought him into the urban environment. So there's lots of important knowledge gaps that remain and lots of important questions in our field that other sectors have long sort of answered. So we're sort of blazing new trails here in urban forestry just by virtue of the fact that urban forestry and the definition of urban forestry is so new. And it really didn't come into the mainstream until the 80s, 90s. And certainly there's lots of people today who don't know what urban forestry is. The chancellor of our university asked me what it was like to log a park. And so we really don't get into necessarily a lot of that. I suppose that is a component of urban forestry, but we're a little more interested in the planting of the trees and the care of the individual tree as well. So here in Massachusetts, we have what's referred to as a tree warden. And tree wardens are the equivalent of basically municipal foresters, with the difference that tree wardens are also located in rural communities here in Massachusetts. So in the late 1800s, the Massachusetts legislature passed General Law 87, and that basically set up the position of tree warden. And in 1899, it was mandated that every community have a tree warden. So we have a good fortune of basically a pretty well set up network here in Massachusetts with lots of history, where there's a lot of activity at the local level among tree wardens or urban foresters. And they're really important, as you can see from the quote on the left-hand side there. And so we went about trying to familiarize ourselves, especially whenever I got here, with how urban forestry works here in Massachusetts and what a well-run urban forestry program looks like at the local level. And that's, of course important in a state where there are 351 municipalities. So we went and conducted some research interviews with folks like Alan Snow, as you can see here on the right-hand side. We're there with some of our students. He's leading a tree walk, an annual tree walk here in the town of Amherst that I get to bring my students out on. And so, of course, like I said, we're interested in deepening our knowledge of urban forestry, fostering familiarity with urban forestry, and what does a good urban forest program look like. And one way to obtain reliable data, and this is not relying on hearsay, but this is to perform research interviews. These are formal, systematic ways of going about collecting information that's pretty familiar to most people, because most of us have conducted conversations in the past. And this is just done in a little bit more of a systematic way. So we went out and interviewed these tree wardens for 3 years across Massachusetts. In our states, you think of New York, of course, as being sort of downstate, upstate, if you will. Well, Massachusetts, it's a little bit like an east-west, if you will. And we are right around here in what is geographically essentially the center of the state, but we get called Western Massachusetts because we're outside of Boston. So these are the areas that I went around and interviewed tree wardens. We interviewed about 50 tree wardens. Out of the 351 communities, it's estimated that there's about 250 or so active tree wardens. As you can imagine, with a state the size of Massachusetts in terms of population and the numbers of different communities, 351 communities, it's a spectrum where we have some really well-run programs. And I think of communities like Cambridge and Brookline and Springfield and Northampton and other areas like that. And then we have some areas, especially when we get into the rural settings, where there isn't a lot of activity at all. The urban forest program or the municipal forest program is very reactive. It's basically an individual clearing a tree from a road, for example, or something like that after the fact, after it's fallen down. So when we get out and do these sorts of interviews with folks throughout the two regions here in Massachusetts, one of the things I want to mention, of course, is that you need to include your impressions as a qualitative researcher. We think of taking measurements in forestry and in other sciences and sort of remaining objective from those sorts of things. It's not like that with qualitative work. And then, of course, we draw our conclusions from our experiences as well as the data that we've collected. There's a nice picture on the right-hand side of us right here in Amherst. This is the little downtown core here in Amherst. Our population at least doubles whenever UMass is in session with the 30,000 students here at UMass. But it's a great place to live, as we were kidding around about earlier. And so we went around asking tree wardens to help describe their position, highlight resources, indicate whether they monitor for things like pests, what sort of educational training needs they may have, what sort of interactions they may have in terms of other groups and other stakeholders. And so we found out that a lot of our tree wardens, and I think there's some definite parallels here, even though a state like New York, for example, wouldn't have tree wardens, there's a lot of parallels with your municipal forestry folks and the folks there that do that sort of equivalent work. So tree wardens in the more populated areas here in Massachusetts worked for a Department of Public Works or some sort of, especially in the rural areas, some sort of highway division essentially. And you often have director or superintendent affiliated with the name. In other words, they may be the director of Public Works or director of a division in Public Works. For example, Alan Snow here in Amherst is the director of the Forests and Parks Division for the municipality in Department of Public Works. So he works under the Commissioner of Public Works. But often when you get to more rural areas, you have a superintendent of highways and roads, or roads and highways, that sort of thing. And that person has essentially tree warden related responsibilities or municipal forest related responsibilities. And here in Massachusetts, a little bit like parts of New York, where you have a little bit, again, those regional sorts of divides. In Massachusetts, in Western Mass, tree wardens are much more likely to operate on smaller budgets. They have less access to infrastructure. And there are still spots here in Massachusetts where people have real trouble getting reliable internet. And so that's something that's sort of a reality of the position. As you continue to move west, you're moving away from the population base, and that aligns with what some of the literature has said with that's out there. As you get away into those smaller communities with less of a tax base, the urban forest program becomes more reactive. Tree wardens and urban foresters in general are interested in continuing education. They're interested in learning more about pests, about how to conduct inventories, about information about proper tree planting. And they do enjoy that in-person interaction. At least whenever we conducted these interviews pre-COVID, that's what they essentially told us. That being said, they do believe, of course, that web-based programming does have its place, but we do need to think about sort of the dynamic in terms of our folks that are performing sort of forest-related activities at the municipal level. They're often middle-aged or older individuals. A lot of them are white males, but that dynamic, they're not necessarily quite as tech savvy as some of the other folks in other sectors. So we just need to keep in mind that they do believe that there's a place for web-based programming and exchange of information, but that doesn't necessarily replace the in-person interaction altogether. So in terms of pests, well, we have a rich history of pests here in Massachusetts, being the site of Trouvelot's introduction of gypsy moth back in the 1800s. But tree wardens across the state are concerned with a whole variety of pests. And this is a quote from Ray Rose, who's a tree warden out at Rentham. It's really interesting, and this is an area that deserves further study. It's interesting because pests are a little bit of a double-edged sword. Obviously, they can be deleterious to trees, and tree wardens are concerned about that, and shade tree committee members are concerned about that. And we're going to get into more about that in a second. But they also have the benefit of bringing urban forest management to the fore, bringing urban forest management to the public dialogue. So when people are starting to lose trees en masse, they become very concerned, and that starts to make headlines and make the news. And so tree wardens and folks that love trees are concerned with trees in terms of pests and catastrophic pest occurrences. But we also need to realize that there is somewhat, if we can say, a benefit in that it does bring urban forestry, helps urban forestry cut through all of the static of all the things that are going on out there. This, of course, is taken from New Haven, and we know that that's known formally as the city of elms. And we have many, many streets here in New England that have an elm street. And this is just, I wanted to throw in a kind of a gratuitous sort of before and after picture in Worcester. And of course, that's due to the Asian longhorn beetle. Many communities in Worcester had Norway maple populations. Why did we have Norway maple populations like this so high? Because they replaced elm trees. So we have communities, neighborhoods, wards in Worcester with 80% or more Norway maple. Well, this insect on the right-hand side was really happy about that. So they removed over 30,000 trees in Worcester. And that's, again, sort of speaks to the fact as to why tree wardens are concerned with pests. Basically, 2/3 of our urban trees are some sort of maple or some sort of oak. And that's obviously very problematic. So again, these invasive insects are a problem, and they're a concern as it relates to what our tree wardens are essentially thinking. Tree wardens interact with a number of different municipal departments and commissions and shade tree committees. So they're very busy on that front. And in terms of sort of kind of summarizing this aspect of our research, they have a great capacity, successful tree wardens. This is Rich Parasolidi on the right. He's a tree warden in Northampton. That's Lily Lombard on the left. She's one of the most active volunteers that they have over there. And so the tree warden, so Rich has a great capacity to interact with a wide range of people, from volunteers that want a lot of his time to individuals that are obviously much more passive, to the politicians in the community. And that's what a successful tree warden looks like. I gained a great appreciation for their capacity for cooperation with these different individuals. The community-based variation, as you can imagine, in a municipality with 350, or in a state with 351 municipalities, and issues of priority can vary from community to community. So that means we as volunteers need to be sensitive to that. Maybe there's a tree planting campaign in one community. Maybe another community is just concerned with some sort of, maybe there's been a natural disaster event like a flooding and they're looking to rebuild, or maybe there's a renovation going on, or maybe there's lots of construction going on. So those issues of priority are really important, and we need to be sensitive to that as volunteers. And of course, we saw that tree wardens urban foresters interact with a lot of different organizations, including shade tree committees. So we did the same sort of approach. We went out and interviewed shade tree committees from across the state. We actually have one of our grad students here is graciously digging around trying to kind of finalize how many shade tree committees we have here in Massachusetts. We estimate that there are about 44 shade tree committees as of the last count. We were able to interview 13 of them. That's how many that I could locate and actually interview myself. And so we put together a great interview tool with lots of input from other agency experts and other faculty and those sorts of things. We're not going to go through all of the methodologies, but again, we just applied some qualitative research methodologies. I'm going to try to take us as quickly as we can to some of the responses here. We divided our interview tool into 3 categories: into introductory questions, operational questions, and community relationships. And again, this is kind of pivoting and shifting to talk a little bit about the volunteers or the shade tree committee members here from the 13 shade tree committees that we could find in Massachusetts. This is there really isn't any research information out there on shade tree committees. So this is sort of, we were plowing a little bit of new ground here, but we're trying to kind of build a baseline of information so that we could learn about what a well-run shade tree committee looks like and how they should interact with the urban forester, with the municipal forester, or again, in our case, with the tree warden. So we asked folks about their involvement in the local tree committee, how their meetings are run, what sort of budget they might have, who they might interact with, and of course, what their relationship was like with their tree warden. So we're really fortunate. I think it was 1990 when the America the Beautiful program was initiated this was the first President Bush's office. Ever since that happened, that increased the flow of funds from the federal government, generally through the Forest Service, not always, but generally through the Forest Service to the states and down to the municipalities. And you saw a real blossoming of shade tree committees over the last 30 years. The range generally is about somewhere around 7 individuals on a shade tree committee, and many of them are very passionate. They serve from an area of deep personal interest. Many people have long-standing memories associated with trees and positive, fond experiences growing up and getting their hands on trees and climbing trees and interacting with trees and those sorts of things. That has its positive and its negative, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through this the rest of this presentation. But basically, we found that, and here in Massachusetts, local committees that are officially recognized need to post. They're called posting laws. They need to actually public notice laws. They need to actually post that they're having a meeting. I believe it's 72 hours in advance. So there's basically a great degree of incentive from state regulations to have regular meetings, to post that they're going to have those meetings, and then post the minutes from those meetings. So that information is generally pretty accessible. So lots of folks met on a monthly basis. They took minutes and they had an agenda because they kind of have to on some level, just like tree wardens sort of have to be on some level because the communities have been mandated that here in Massachusetts. Lots of tree committees are involved in exciting, fun things. Who doesn't love the gratuitous tree planting picture, right? So lots of tree committees, their volunteers are involved in tree planting, conducting inventories, participating in Arbor Day celebrations, leading Arbor Day celebrations, working with children in the community in that regard. This is from Fall River. It's a community just not too far outside of Boston, a little bit south of Boston. They're also, it's interesting. Well, I said earlier that a lot of these people got involved with these committees because they're passionate about trees. Are these people necessarily organizationally inclined? The short answer to that is no. And of course, everything's going to be a spectrum, but there was a real mix. Many committees didn't even have a budget. So this is a great quote from the Newburyport Tree Committee. When I joined the Tree Commission, never received any money. I said, why? And this individual had a background in business. And the mayor said, show me a plan and I'll show you the money, which is a great lesson, I think, for us. And so that individual, of course, was part of spearheading the plan and using his skills from his professional work on the volunteer scene to help move the urban forest management program in Newburyport forward. Lots of communities, lots of shade tree committees interact with, of course, as you'd expect, municipal DPW, other committees and commissions, and NGOs. And one of our grad students is actually examining NGOs right now. And many of them, of course, have and need to have a positive relationship with these other actors and regular interaction. And this, of course, is especially critical as it relates to the relationship with the tree warden. The vast majority of these committees had good relationships with tree wardens because, in part, they had regular interaction and access to that individual. I will say that it didn't really go down in our interview data with tree wardens when I was out with them, but there are some tree wardens, there are some urban foresters that are absolutely frightened of the idea of having a shade tree committee in their community because they think that volunteers are going to be very difficult to work with. And in some cases, that can be the situation. So that's not an example, of course, of a well-run urban tree committee and urban tree management program, but that is a reality that's out there. And if you're interested in starting something in your locale, you need to realize there may be a little bit of initial pushback, and your ability to build that relationship in a positive way and not sort of come in as someone from the top down that's going to tell the urban forester how to do their job, but somebody that's going to be working from the ground up to do things like lobby and help support operationally urban tree activities is really going to help make all the difference. So here's again another couple positive illustrative quotes from Newburyport and from Brookline about their positive relationship with their respective tree wardens and how important that is. There were some unsuccessful collaborations with shade tree committees. They were willing to tell us a little bit about some of the neighborhood groups that sort of pop up in different settings and how some of those challenges can be the case. We'll leave the jokes about the cemetery commissions being difficult to work with to the cemetery commissions. I don't know a whole lot about what's there, but in some cases also folks did lament that they didn't have access to their tree warden. And of course, we understand that tree wardens are pulled in a lot of different directions, but people do need to feel that they're being heard. So that is something that's important from the other side. If somebody is an urban forester or municipal forester, you need to give people voice. They need to feel like they're at least being heard. You can't obviously carry out all of their wishes, but that is something that's important. And again, a couple quotes here about sort of getting along and working well in the communities. And it is important to note that just because in our research we couldn't really uncover a lot of details about unsuccessful collaborations, that's because people in these sorts of settings may not be as willing as we'd like to be forthright about some of this negative news. So we just want to kind of keep that in the back of our minds, if you will. So as we start to kind of wrap up here, one of the things I mentioned again earlier, that part of that double-edged sword, people are involved with shade tree committees because they love trees. Again, they may not necessarily be organizationally inclined. It's not a lot of formal evaluation. Of course, Rebecca and myself as extension professionals, and Ryan, you too, we know the importance of program evaluation. This is something that can absolutely be provided in terms of support from cooperative extension or from a state agency to a locale, to a municipality, to a shade tree committee, because there's really not a lot of means of formal evaluation. So if a shade tree committee is taking part in a community tree planting effort, there's probably not a formal survey associated with that or a formal way of talking with participants. One of the challenges that urban tree committees are contending with is volunteerism. Retention and recruiting is something that people often feel challenged to carry out. And the landscape's not necessarily the friendliest for that because volunteering and volunteerism is so erratic. We see numbers sort of, for many years, they actually were sort of at a steady decline here, as you can see on the right-hand side. In some cases, they bounced back, but there's a lot of irregularity. And so again, training and support can be provided to shade tree committees to help them to better recruit. So effective shade tree committees are successfully embedded in the matrix of the local municipality, the local governance of that locale. They have the capacity to work well with diverse audiences. This area of technological expertise, it's part again of recruiting, bringing in people from the next generation. There are certainly people of all ages that are technologically inclined, but being someone that works with students from 18 to 22 as undergraduates, I can certainly tell you that while we sort of immigrated into that world, they are, of course, they've grown up with that sort of technology. And that's something that's really important. The idea of getting on, have Facebook and Instagram and all of those sorts of things. They need to support the tree warden. Planning is critical. And this is where these individuals can can receive some assistance, again, from cooperative extension and state agencies, because they aren't necessarily budget people. They're not necessarily program evaluation specialists, but they need to be actively fostering goodwill. That is something that is absolutely important. There's many different training curricula that are out there. This is Isature. This is one sort of straightforward volunteer training curriculum that is out there. There's a number of them that are available. There's a number of resources that are out there. But to sort of wrap up, successful urban forest management from the municipal tree warden standpoint, from the municipal forester standpoint, those individuals are active and engaged. They have great capacity to cooperate. They got a lot of patience to work with a lot of different actors, a lot of different individuals, from the town decision makers to the straight up residents. They're interested in continuing education, and the urban tree committee volunteers, they need to have great capacity to cooperate with other organizations, other committees. They need to support that tree warden. They need to actively plan and evaluate. Again, that's an area that they could receive some help with, and fostering goodwill. And I think the area of future research, and I think we're going to just kind of end it here, that is this sort of statement from Aldo Leopold almost 100 years ago. We're not there yet, but he talked about two groups. Right? He talked about one that seems to barely be aware of the existence of the other. One studies the human community as though it were separate. The other studies the plant and the animal community. Perhaps the inevitable fusion of these two lines of thoughts will constitute the outstanding advance of the present century. Well, we're well into the next century, and we need to be thinking about how we can better understand how these two groups work together. There's lots of room for future research related to pests and understanding, volunteer training activities and opportunities. The issue of liability, we now see communities that won't take volunteers on without signing waivers. So this is an area that's becoming much more of an issue as people continue to become concerned about litigation and all of those sorts of things. I personally volunteer for Regreen Springfield. I've been out there tree planting and working in Springfield since I started here at Massachusetts with my friend and mentor, Dr. Dave Bloniars. And there's a lot of great information from the Arbor Day Foundation. If you're interested in more information, please feel free. Ryan mentioned my Urban Forestry Today webcast. You can go to that website, urbanforestrytoday.org. But certainly dig around in the Arbor Day Foundation website. They've got bulletins that they now made them for free. They now made them available free, which is great. They've got a nice volunteer one up here, but you can actually go to the Arbor Day Foundation and dig around for some great resources, as well as AmeriCorps. And that's it for myself. How to do for time? Not too bad. I think I left you enough time, Becky.
All right, so I will thank you, Rick. That was great. And I'm going to kind of build on what he started. I have to share my screen first. Okay, so yes, I'm going to build on what Rick started and kind of expand on. So just a little bit about me. So as Ryan mentioned, I am a professor at SUNY Morrisville. I teach in our natural resources program, and my area of expertise is tree care, arboriculture, and other forestry related things. But the other hat that I'm wearing today is that I work with a few different tree committees, and the two that I spend the most of my time with is that I'm chair of the City of Norwich Street Tree Committee, which is where I live. Prior to coming to Morrisville, I was an extension educator in Chenango County in Norwich, and so I've been on that committee for about 20 years, which, as I was putting this together, I was realizing how old I now am. And so I've been working with that committee for a long time. The City of Norwich, some of you are probably at least familiar with general where Norwich is, but Norwich is a small community, and we are surrounded by a very rural landscape, and so we don't have a lot of resources. And some of you might be in the same boat. I might ask where everybody's from in a little bit. But then I also work with our campus tree committee, which is a slightly different scenario because we have a grounds crew, we have a campus arborist, and so I've kind of see a little bit of both of these worlds where you have trained staff to work with and not. All right, so as Rick mentioned, tree committees, and so I'm going to mostly focus on tree committees and working with tree committees. And Rick mentioned that they have a lot of value, they can do a lot of things. And we can really use tree committees to do all sorts of, do everything soup to nuts. So help with planning, either project planning or writing management plans, reviewing projects that might implement trees that are going to affect trees that might be implemented in cities or in your city or village, like streetscape projects or new constructions. We might be involved with grant writing, which is a more and more thing that happens all the time. Being advocates, either to local politicians to do things like increase budgets or provide support for the municipal staff that you already have. And advocates to residents for public support, because they, of course, are the taxpayers here, and they are the ones that are interacting with these trees on a regular basis. And so having that boost in support can be really important to a tree program. I kind of joke, we don't have to have citizen advocacy organizations for roads or for water mains, but we need them for trees. Tree committees can also do things like help celebrate Arbor Day and complete Tree City paperwork, which is sometimes where a lot of communities are starting. And so I want to kind of go over the scope of tree committees, different roles that people play, and then support. And Rick was just talking about support, so we'll pick up a lot of that. So the scope of your tree committee should be relatively well defined, and you might look at the activities, the type of planning, what are the different things that you want that committee to do. And this is the village of Oxford. This is their tree committee. Most communities, and some of you might have one of these, most communities have a promulgating ordinance that clearly defines what that tree committee is. And I just wanted to share a couple examples. And so this is Norwich's, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but ours is relatively generic. It's a little bit lacking in some cases. And so we have 3 official members on our tree committee, which really isn't enough. When we meet, we typically have 6 or 7 people in total, but only 3 of us are officially members. But we do things, plan, provide information for, promote, and control the planting and care of street trees. And so our primary mission is about planting. We also keep a recommended tree species list for planting. We do a few other things, but we're mostly focused on planting. We provide some input on removals when they have to come out. And right now we're working on an emerald ash borer treatment project, which is really just a way to delay removing trees and having to plant more. So we have a minimal description in our ordinance. This next one is the village of Oxford, and I just showed you their picture. They are designated to have 5 people. They are a smaller community than Norwich, in the 3,000 to 4,000. And so I feel like 5 is a good number. Norwich is 3. If I lose somebody that's on, let's see, if one of the official designees, it's losing a significant percentage. Oxford's ordinance is a little more in depth. They are asked to study, develop, and update annually and administer a written plan for the care, preservation, planting, or replacement of trees. They're not involved with pruning and removal. They are focused primarily on trees, but they are doing more than just coordinating tree plantings. They also do keep a recommended species list. And I thought I'd throw one in from a larger community. And so this is Binghamton, which is down 81. And so Binghamton has a tree board that is of 7 people, and it consists of 3 people designated by the Parks and Recs Committee, which oversees trees, and then 3 appointed by the mayor. And then the Parks and Rec commissioner is on that committee, which I think is good because they are an actual decision maker. They can actually make things happen. But they do a little bit more in-depth things where they have been asked to study the problems and needs of the city's trees. But again, they are still mostly focused on tree planting, but then also on public education and promotion of the trees. It does say in here that they are also an advisory committee for city council and the planning commission and the zoning board, which is nice because that potentially gives them a voice at those committee meetings when necessary. So these can define, the ordinances can define the boundaries, or at least maybe not the boundaries, but maybe the foundation of what a lot of tree commissions can do. And so you do have to decide when you're thinking about what your tree committee is going to, focus on. What projects do you want them to do? What do you want that committee to be known for? And as I've mentioned and Rick mentioned, there's a lot of tree planting that happens. This is Oxford. Oxford every year does a seedling giveaway. And so they order trees from the DEC nursery and bundle them up. And so the tree board is very active in the packaging and the preparation of this. And then they have an event around Arbor Day in the spring where they pass them out. You might also have groups do, of course, public promotion where you have a social media campaign, or you write newspaper articles, celebrate Arbor Day. And so this is a picture from probably 10 or 12 years back, actually, yeah, 10 years ago. This is where some of our Norwich folks. And so celebrating Arbor Day is often something that tree committees are involved with, and it can be a very public event where there's, as a requirement for Tree City USA, you need to celebrate Arbor Day, and you have to do that public acknowledgement. And so we always try to weave in whatever projects are coming up. If we have tree plantings on the horizon, trying to get people engaged with requesting trees or thinking about tree maintenance for the spring when we do our Tree City USA press releases. After you've decided the types of activities that you might want your tree commission to work on, you need to think about the roles that individual members are going to play in the commission. And Rick talked about this too. People have specific niches that they fill, and you can think about this in two different ways. It's either, if you have a slate of people on your board already, try to identify what skill sets they have and what skills might be missing, and then recruit people for those particular slots. And so you can kind of assign people to different roles based on their skill set, or recruit specifically for them. And so you might have people on your committee, or you might recruit for people that have technical knowledge. And so on my tree board, that's the role that I play. I have that technical knowledge. And fortunately, there's somebody else on our board too that has a technical knowledge as well. And so you might be looking for people to help, and this is also might depend on what kind of municipal staff you have. If you have a village forester or arborist on staff, or someone in your Department of Public Works that has that skill set, you may not need so much of this on your committee. In Norwich, we don't have that. I respond to our Department of Public Works supervisor, whose main focus is water and streets and other infrastructure. And so he looks to the tree committee to tell him what to do with the trees. And so depending on your needs in that area, you might need to have somebody with a fair bit of technical knowledge or not. If you need someone with a lot of technical knowledge, you could look to green industry professionals in your area that might be willing to be part of that, part of your committee. Technical information or technical knowledge could also come and not just relates to trees, but also, as Rick mentioned, social media or grant writing, where there are these particular skill sets that some people are really good at that you might want to have on your commission. And so social media, of course, as was mentioned, is becoming and is, one of those things that everyone expects, that you're going to have a social media presence. Grant writing is definitely something that is a more and more, if we're looking for extra money in our communities, can be tricky, and we're often being asked to find grants to do things. The next category is something that I call network connectors. So these might be people who are on your committee who have connections to other people. And these connections can be useful, especially when you're recruiting. And recruiting can mean recruiting of volunteers for events. So you're having a planting day and you need 30 volunteers to come out for the event, and they all need to have shovels and they're ready to plant trees. And so you might need people to make those connections. You might also need people that can make connections with where you're going to put the plants. And so fortunately in Norwich, it's relatively easy for me to get enough volunteers to do the planting itself. Sometimes we run into situations where we have a hard time finding enough planting sites. because we have homeowners request the, sorry about that, request the planting of a tree in front of their home. And so I have somebody on my board who is very well connected with the local community. He's been there for a long time, but especially he's connected with people who own apartment houses. And so these are single family style homes that might have 2 or 3 apartments in them. And so in our last round of tree planting, about a quarter of the trees we planted went in front of these apartment homes, which is something that we were really excited about, because that's often an area that we don't have a lot of response from. And landlords don't really care whether there's a tree in front of their house or not. And so having people that have the right kind of connections can be important. Of course, your committee is going to want to have a lot of doers, the people that are going to show up and do the things you need them to do, whether it's planting the trees or writing the articles or setting up for an event, tearing down. So the people that show up and are helping out, and they're there all day, and you need them, right? You need them. And so this can be planting. It can be so it can be like the physical planting work. It can be the planning of those events, grants. This is I don't know if any of you have been involved with the applying for a state urban forestry grant. The New York State grant portal is awesome. And it takes a lot of patience and understanding of how grant systems work. And so that kind of task is really a particular skill set that if you have somebody that's willing to do that work. I remember when I put together our last grant, it probably took 40 hours just to put the thing together and into the system. And so, these different skill sets and what they're willing to do is important. The last category that I have on here are just what I would call participants. And these are people that you might have a board that's made up of 6 or 7 people, and you might have a couple people on the board who, in some essence, just come to the meetings. They show up, and sometimes we can take these people for granted because they're not maybe as involved as we would like them to be. And so I like to put them on the list because these people have a lot of value as well. And so you have to try and engage them and remind ourselves that they can be visionaries, they can be brainstorming. We can use them to help with problem solving. And so while they may not be able to participate in some of these other ways, even having them at the meetings can be important. And especially when you need enough people for things like quorum and to make decisions. And so people are going to fit into different roles, and those roles can change over time depending on people's individual situations and the projects that are happening. So when you're looking for volunteers, you have a number of different places you can go. And this, I'm really focusing on like volunteers for the tree committee itself, not necessarily for events. But if you have events, you might be able to pull people who have come to events and were really enthusiastic or really helpful and seemed like they would be good fits for the tree committee. So you can use events as a way to kind of test people out and see how they are with trees. You might also look to like-minded groups. So I mentioned professionals, green industry professionals. So these might be local arborists or landscapers, nurserymen, people that have some kind of plant knowledge. Might be a good addition to your tree board. There's also the Rotary. And so you might be familiar with Rotary. Rotary International has and I don't necessarily have the right word for it, but they have a whole mission related to trees and tree planting. And so a lot of local Rotaries get involved with tree planting projects. And so you might be able to convince somebody from your local Rotary to be a Rotary representative on your tree board. And if nothing else, they should be a group to keep in mind for when you're doing those tree planting events and you need volunteers. I would call the Rotary. Scouts. So this picture here, of course, these are like 6-year-old girls. They're not necessarily going to be on your tree board, but their parents might be, their scoutmasters might be. So some of these groups that are inherently linked to the environment might have adults that could be representatives on your board. Master gardeners, as an extension educator, I couldn't not mention them. These are trained volunteers through the cooperative extension system who are plant people. They may not want to be a representative from the master gardeners, but as wearing their master gardener hat knowledge, be a member of their local tree commission. And garden clubs are along the same line. Norwich does a lot of work in tandem with, we actually have 2 garden clubs in Norwich. And so we often connect for volunteering, and one of our members on the tree board is like our garden club representative. And so it's a nice connection. Right. The last group that I want to mention here is, so I always have these like little side groups. And so this last group I like to call callers. And so you might have a situation where you're trying to find new blood for your committee, and you've kind of looked at all the same places and you're just not finding the right person. And so you might have people that contact the city or the village on a regular basis inquiring about trees, whether it be the tree in their front yard or their neighbor's tree or some other kind of tree related situation. And so you might ask the clerk's office to keep track of those kind of calls and see if there's someone who has expressed interest in trees through a different avenue that you might be able to talk to about formalizing their commitment to their community trees. And so I know I have some people in Norwich that whenever their tree has an issue, they call, and you know, I can get them involved and engaged because they're concerned about it, but they never would have thought to volunteer themselves to be part of any tree activity. Oh, I should put this on it too. So this is the Morrisville's mostly horticulture students and some of our natural resources students in this picture. So we have Morrisville faculty who are part of the Village of Morrisville Tree Board. And so I, as Morrisville faculty, you know, I'm part of our City of Norwich Tree Board. And so some of you might have another college nearby that might have a biology professor, or you know, not all the schools have horticulture, but like OCC might have some professors that live near you. Anyway. So support, this is what Rick talked about this. So you have to support your volunteers and give them the right kinds of skills. And training is important. There's lots of different topics that they might need training in. The urban forestry concepts, grant writing, using social media, whatever it is, providing training. Also, not only does it give them the skill sets, but it shows your volunteers that you are investing in them, and that investment can be a return. You need to think about what tasks you assign to people. We talked about the different roles, and so asking people to do the things that fit into their mental role about what they can do, either mental role or physical role. So in this picture here, you see the woman in the blue holding up the flag, and on the left, and that's Meryl, and she's been on the tree board since before I was on the tree board. And early on, you know, she would be at every planting helping out, but she's probably 85 right now, and so that's not something she can do anymore. But she really still wants to be engaged. So how do I engage her? What tasks do I assign her to keep her motivated? And I want her on the tree board. Successful projects and recognition kind of go hand in hand, and you're probably going to have successful projects, but it's also celebrating those successful projects and celebrating the people who participate in those successful projects. And so successful projects can be as simple as celebrating Arbor Day, or you know, planting a few trees, or they can be as complex as completing an inventory or planting 150 trees. And so the scale of the project does not matter, but having people feel like what they've done is important. And so celebrating those successes, recognizing people for their contributions, thanking them, you know, general volunteer management kinds of things to keep them motivated to being part of that committee. Rick also touched on this, working without those municipal staff. And so in this picture, my DPW supervisor is in the red there, that's Ed. And so Ed was really helpful for our last tree planting. You know, I basically had to tell him what to do to plant the tree, but he mobilized some of his guys to go out and pre-dig some of the sites, which was awesome. But I especially have to remember that trees are not his priority. You know, he's concerned about other things. And this is true with any municipal staff, even those staff that are 100% dedicated to trees. You know, whatever I want to do is not necessarily on their menu for the day. And so we need to be able to support the municipal staff so that they can then in turn support us, and understanding the limitations that they have on their time and even in the scope of their job. if I say to him, hey, let's plant 200 trees, he's going to be like, no, we do not have the capacity to do that. Even if we got all the grant funding for it. And so what is the scope that he has and the limitation that he has? I have to realistic expectations, right? So the working with the municipal staff is a two-way street. There has to be a lot of communication and realistic expectations on both ends of the spectrum. And so, he has expectations for the tree committee to do certain things, and we have expectations from him. And as long as those are clear, the working relationship is great. And the other thing to keep in mind is your tree committee members, your tree committee itself might be relatively long-standing. Sometimes your municipal staff can cycle through. And so sometimes depending on, and also like depending on what the task at hand is, I might have to work with different people that don't necessarily know what I'm up to with the tree. Like, who are you? Why are you here? And so just understanding that, that like my expectations for what I want to do are not necessarily what they have on their docket for today. Oh, it would be really helpful, I should mention this, if your municipal staff who is in charge of trees, whether they're a forester or not, can come to the tree board meetings. Ed is busy, so he doesn't come most of the time. We used to have an associate or an assistant superintendent that would come. We don't have that position anymore. And so sometimes it is challenging because we want to make decisions and we can't because we don't have authority to make certain decisions. And so getting them on board to being able to come to the meetings is whenever possible is important. And I understand, so Ed's the only guy that goes to all of the different committees that relate to public works. And so, that's a lot on his plate. So I just want to mention a couple other support opportunities, or 3 of them. They're all kind of meshed together, and I'm sure some of you have heard of these, but I just want to put them back on your radar. And so the New York DEC has a urban forestry program. Let me get my buttons, there it goes. And they have an urban community forestry program, which I'm sure you'll hear more about. But the thing that I want to mention at the moment is that the DEC Urban Community Forestry Program, Gloria and Dan and Christina, they help coordinate the New York State Urban Forestry Council and then the relief committees. And the New York State Urban Forestry Council is an organization, it's a nonprofit, but it's a state advisory council, and they have a lot of great information. So they put out a regular newsletter. This is the blog with grant postings and workshops, and it's really made up of people like you. And so some of the people on the Urban Forestry Council are professionals, and some of them are volunteers and tree boards. And so one of the things, like I said, it's all kind of, we'll come back to the other thing. Hold on. So the other thing is New York State Relief, which is more directly coordinated by DEC, but these are regional committee meetings of mostly volunteers as well as DEC staff and some other professionals. And so this is a true partnership, and these committees come together and talk about local needs. They typically have local workshops or kind of region workshops. So we have a Region 7 Relief Committee. And they also plan the statewide urban forestry relief conference, which is where all this kind of merges together. But so DEC has a urban forestry newsletter. If you go to I would just search it, New York State Relief. They have a newsletter you can sign up for, and then you can kind of check in on their events pages. But a couple events I want to put on your radar. The first one I'll mention is that we have our Region 7 Relief Committee has bi-monthly meetings. We meet remotely. I don't have the link to give you. The coordinator of it, Andy Goler, who's the regional forester for the area, didn't have it ready yet. And so maybe we can get that out to you once it's good. But we meet every other month on the second Thursday. And the people on the committee are tree board members and advocates and professionals. And so we try to identify the needs that are happening locally and do things to respond to it. And to kind of take that up a level is the New York State Relief Conference. And this year it's being held in Watertown at Jefferson Community College. And so nice and local to get to. And it's usually 2 or 3 days. Last year we did a virtual conference, which was okay. But so this is really where people from all over the state, tree board volunteers, professionals, landscape architects, municipal officials, municipal employees, all come together and learn about urban forestry issues. And so there's workshops and tours and great networking events. And the support that happens at these kind of events is really why I bring them up, because you can interact with people who are having the same kind of problems you are and try to get ideas from them and learn from them. And so these are really, really great things to be involved with. And with the Relief Conference, they try to keep it relatively inexpensive as well. So it can be, the Relief Conference can be a great way to reward some of your tree volunteers, tree board volunteers, by sending them to that conference for a couple of days. So I think that's all I've got. I'll just leave it with this picture. And I just want to mention, so on the right-hand side of this picture are 2 of my longtime tree board volunteers. Dan in the hat, he unfortunately moved away a couple years ago, and he's been like irreplaceable. But Laura Lee in the brown shirt, I was looking through my pictures to put into the presentation, and she's in almost every of my tree planting pictures from over the years. And so it just made me really happy to see her smiling face in this picture. Thank you.
That was great, Rebecca. Nicely done.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, both of you. They're awesome presentations. I think all the folks really learned a lot. I wanted to open it up if you have any questions for either of our guests. I muted everybody, so unmute yourself. And I guess we can go one by one. There's not too many people here. Someone's got to have a question.
Can I just ask where everyone's from?
Yeah, we're small enough to introduce each other or introduce ourselves.
We sure are.
I'll start. So I'm Robbie. This is my husband, Tom, and we recently bought a condo in Syracuse and are in the process of moving from Casanova to Syracuse and trying to connect in Syracuse with everybody. But I wanted to go to one of the town meetings, and we went to the city hall and found out it was all virtual. So it makes it a little harder. But you had shown a picture of Kim, who is, I think, recently hired. She's with you showed her with the Urban Forestry Council, is that right? And does anybody know where she is or how we can connect with her? Both Linda and I are very anxious to meet with her.
So Kim you're talking about Kim who just got hired by the city of Syracuse?
Yes. Yeah, right.
I think she just started like last week or the week before that. So she's not fully online yet. She's still kind of in the orientation phase of starting a new job. But I promise when I haven't even met her yet. So when I meet her, I'll make sure you get some contact info.
Okay, where's her office? Where's she going to be located? Do you know?
I don't know if I can tell you that. You seem too motivated.
Okay.
No, I'm sure she'll be where the Parks Department is. We're on Spencer Drive or something like that near the Harper. Yep.
It's in our neighborhood. We can walk right over.
Yes, you can.
I walk by it all the time on the creek walk.
Right. So that's where all the city's forestry department is housed.
Okay, that's good to know.
I shouldn't have told you that.
Yeah. So it makes sense for me to go after Robbie because literally if I could see through the wall, she's like across the street. So we're both in Syracuse and yeah, we've become partners in grime, dirt, and even though we're in the city of Syracuse, our focus right now is our own little Franklin Square area. And the questions I have, I don't think you get an answer, but Ryan could probably steer us in the right direction. I wondered if we already have an ordinance and like who's on our committee and do we, because I don't necessarily want to be appointed to any more committees right now. But it'd be great to know if we have one and what the rules we're operating under are, because I already get in a small amount of trouble around here, and Robbie is hot on the trail. So. Anyway, Syracuse. So
Yeah, so I don't know offhand. So Steve, he didn't join us. We'll have to give him a little hard time, but
Yeah,
you can search. So like the examples I showed of the ordinances, most communities house their ordinances on remote websites just so that they're publicly updated.
Mhm.
So you can just search for Syracuse ordinances, and they should have a section on trees, and it'll tell you right there whether or not you have a tree committee ordinance.
I think we're a tree city, right? So we should probably have lots of documentation. on
I
that.
can
Yeah, I
jump
would
in.
bet you do.
Yeah, jump
There
in.
isn't a tree committee that it went defunct in like 2001 because the people who were in charge of it passed on or moved or something like that. So like I was telling Robbie, they are planning on starting it. That's like one of their first priorities with this new employee that they have.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thing.
So who wants to go next for an introduction? Kevin?
Yeah, sure, I can go. I joined a few minutes late, but my name's
no,
Kevin
it's
Sullivan. I represent the town of Geddes. Our tree committee is just getting up and off the ground thanks to Ryan's efforts. We'll be meeting in March. We have a few grant applications that are pending right now for some tree planting projects. I think the tree committee was needed in the town of Geddes. It never existed to the best of our knowledge. We are the kind of the most direct suburb of the city of Syracuse. So we run along Onondaga Lake. We take in the state fairgrounds, amphitheater, and it's kind of an unusual shaped town, but that's where we're located. So you made some great points today, both Rick and Rebecca. So excellent presentations.
Thanks.
Ryan?
Yep, go ahead, Dick.
Hi, I'm the mayor of the village of Camillus, and I worked with Ryan last fall. I took down about 7 trees that were in our village, in our business district, that had grown into the wires, creating a dangerous situation. So Ryan came along, I took the trees down, we ground out the stumps, and Ryan helped. And we picked out 7 trees, which we planted last fall. And then we're working on a program now where, and we're new with this in the village. We never had an Arbor Day. We're not a tree city. But what we're going to do is on Friday the 13th, which is in May, we're having an Arbor Day, and it's going to be at our firehouse. We took down some dead trees at the firehouse, and we're in the process of grinding the stumps out, and we're going to have an Arbor Day, and we're planting 7 trees, 2 of which are going to be on one side of the firehouse, and we're going to have a bench we've ordered, and it's in honor of one of my trustees that passed away, and he was also the fire chief. So we're having a combination of an Arbor Day celebration and a celebration for the gentleman that passed away. In the meantime, I have one street that has a lot of old trees on it, and I was trying to figure out how to afford to take these trees down, and in walks a gentleman from Nielsen Tree Service, who, as many of you know, does the work for National Grid. And he walked in and he said, we want to take down 8 trees on North Street. And I said, yes, Virginia, there is a Christmas. And they're taking them down. And I talked to Ryan about it. And my next step after doing the firehouse gig will be, if not this year, we talked about the following year, we're going to plant some trees along North Street to replace these trees. And I've already had feedback from some people yelling at me why I'm taking the trees down, but I tried to explain to them, really, it was not my decision. National Grid wanted them down because they were, as Nielsen said, they were soft trees, and I've had a lot of problems. I've had some limbs fall on cars and whatever, so they had to come down. Number one, And number two, the trees are old, they're 50 or 60 years old, and they look like big C's in them because over the years they've had to cut the trees out and they're ugly. So I was kind of glad that that we're having them taken down. But the other thing I wanted to mention was one of the headaches I face as mayor is sewer laterals. And over the years, people have planted trees. And as you know, the roots have grown into the sewers. And I have a big expense with my sewers in replacing these laterals, because once these trees get into the sewer lines, it's not like there's roots growing in there. They form like sponges when they go into sewer lines. They completely stop the sewer lines. So I have to go through the expense of replacing these sewer lines. And the other thing I've learned, and it's kind of reverse from planting trees, is the fact that the trees are there, the roots grow up and they pop up my sidewalks. And I've had to replace a lot of sidewalks. So my county contract cement guy that I have replace my sidewalks, he also has a product called FlexiPad. And it's an asphalt that's porous. And in that area alongside the trees where I've had to replace the sidewalks, I don't want to cut the roots, but I plant this FlexiPad, which it flexes with the roots, so I don't have to replace my sidewalks. I've done that in several places in the village, and it works good, works great. So one thing I've learned, you don't plant trees next to sidewalks, and you don't plant them over sewer laterals unless you have a type of tree that has a short root, and I leave that to Ryan. In fact, when selecting the trees, I leave that to Ryan, because when somebody complains about the tree that I selected, I can blame Ryan.
Lucky me, I don't work for the village.
Anyway, Ryan's been a great help. I appreciate the help he's given us. And I have to thank him. He's really helped to beautify the village.
Well, thank you, Rick, for the glowing review. I mean, it's good to have a elected official joining us. It's good to see the different perspective that you could bring to the issues that you actually face. I know the sidewalk thing is a huge issue. I don't know if Rick or Rebecca, have you had interactions with the whole flexi pavement thing before? I've never really dealt with it before I came here.
Yeah, so one of my webcasts actually has Dave Lefcourt from Cambridge. We're going to go back like August 2018, 2017. COVID's messed up my ability to remember how many years ago now. Just like if it's Thursday and Monday's a holiday, I can't remember if it's Wednesday or not. But yeah, so he talks about using a number of different kind of technical fixes, if you will, and that's one of them. So some great success. Alex Sherman here in Springfield's also used it, and the urban foresters quite frankly rave about it.
Well, you can use it in the downtown area where it's all concrete, and the area surrounding the tree, you can put FlexiPad on it so the tree gets water and moisture through it. That's the other key area.
Cool.
Anyway, it works for us.
That's great. It's a review of a technical solution out in the field in the real world. So last person, Pam, if you just want to go over what you're working on.
Yeah, I'm Pam Wildridge, and I'm a Onondaga County Master Gardener who is now on the DeWitt Tree Committee that is fairly active. I think the DeWitt Committee's been going for like at least 10 years now. Tree City USA, fairly involved. We're going through a little transition period now, though. We have a change in our chairperson. We lost one of our tree committee members, who was the town planner, which was an excellent person to have on our committee. And we're so sorry that he left, got a new job, and we're happy for him, but we are going to really miss him, because having the town planner involved it was just wonderful. So, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to work through that. So some of your suggestions about what to be thinking about with filling some of our empty spaces on our tree committee. is going to be really helpful. And we're also in the process of trying to update our tree ordinance. And we thought we knew what we were doing until we had our town attorney look at it. And then that's a whole nother story. So, yeah, this program is going to be really helpful with getting us some assistance with how we go about updating our tree ordinance. So,
What objections does your town attorney have?
wording, what we thought, people would be interested in knowing, for example, what the right of way is. The attorneys do not want any specifics. They want the more generalized wording used. And we kind of were going the other way and trying to lock things down. So we thought it would be better to have it more specific so that people would know exactly what the right of way is. But that's not the approach that the attorneys want to go. So it makes it much more complicated than what we were envisioning that it was going to be.
Yeah, I feel like that is interesting to hear. I feel like a lot of ordinances that I've seen and stuff from the DEC tries to focus on you being kind of explicit while still, like, obviously you have the clause for wiggle room and stuff, but I feel like they really suggest you have specifics in there.
Yeah, and they wanted a language that it's not just focusing for people that are interested in trees and know about trees. It's just general terminology, that's hard to do.
Yes.
Yeah, we're running into issues like that. So
Great. Well, does anybody have any other specific questions for Rick and Rebecca or Rebecca?
Is it possible to get copies of your slides, or maybe just a few of the slides that had like recommendations for where to go for additional support? Just to I was trying to jot down some of the information, but it was going so quickly. I have these huge gaping holes. I just think that might help us when we're going back through all of this wonderful information that we got, because there's just tons of stuff that you brought to our attention that I think we can apply in so many different ways. And I just think we need a little bit of more help on how we can get that information.
I'm happy to type up the things I referenced and send them to Ryan for him to send out to everybody.
Yep.
That would be great.
I can distribute it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I threw my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me. This is all recorded, so you can rewatch it, but I'm happy to pass along however I can be of help.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I guess I just have one question. Have either of you seen have a more specific strategy for something that's resulted in recruitment of new tree committee members?
Direct ask.
Yeah.
I have found that I can put out a broadcast and say, we need tree members, tree board members. Nobody responds, but I used to work for Cooperative Extension, and the Soil and Water District is just down the hall, and there's a woman there who I've known for many, many years. And I was talking to her one day. She lives in Norwich, and I'm like, why have I not asked you to be on this committee? And she was like, yeah, I'll be on this committee, and so it really was just taking the effort, taking the moment to just ask somebody. It's really the best.
Yeah.
And there's that expression about birds of a feather. So friends of friends, right? Lots of people that do the net after what Becky just said, friends of friends and that sort of thing. There's lots of examples that we encountered in our interviews of people signing on to tree committees because they then were asked. So friends of friends type of scenario. But it's a huge issue. There are books about this. Robert Putnam wrote about it in the 90s called Bowling Alone.
Yep.
It's about basically kind of so I mean, you don't want to sound like it's doom and gloom, but he talked about kind of the unraveling of the social fabric of society, and sense that if you think of those groups that people were involved in for many years, those community groups, like whatever, the Lions clubs or Elks or whatever they are, volunteer groups that assist at hospitals. I mean, the numbers for those groups have kind of been fading away with the generations. So it really is sort of the new part of the new normal with us in terms of passing along our enthusiasm for trees. One of the things I tell people is be prepared to tell your story about why you love trees. You know, most of us got into our field for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's been happenstance. Sometimes we've had some people mentor us from a very young age, but people connect with those one-on-one stories. Again, just like what Rebecca's saying, the direct approach along with your story in terms of why you got involved with trees. Some of my earliest memories are with my father in the bush. We used to log on the farm, but it wasn't because we loved cutting trees, although we had to cut lots of them. It was because we loved trees. And I remember getting when I was learning to speak, I was getting tree ID sessions with my dad. And so I just try to bring that passion to the classroom and to the people that I interact with. It's a passion of mine. But the drawback is, as I said in my presentation, I'm not necessarily terribly organizationally minded, right? I haven't reviewed a lot of budgets over the years and all of those kinds of things. So I personally need help. And I think a lot of tree committees need help in those areas in terms of budgets and evaluation and all of those kinds of things.
One of the other factors is right now is budgeting for tree cutting. And I think a lot of communities don't have enough budgeted to do that, number one. And number two is to get tree cutting services now, because most of the tree services now are 3 to 6 months behind, mainly because they can't get people. A lot of people, like it's just like the restaurants or hotels or anybody, a lot of people have left the business. And a lot of these tree cutting companies don't have what they call climbers anymore. And it's a real problem. And I know when I've ordered some tree cutting, gosh, it's 6 months, 6 to 7 to 8 months. And of course, with the, supply and demand, the cost has gone up too. It's, you don't get a tree cut for $500 anymore. It's $1,000 and up. So cost is a big factor when you're talking about not only planting trees, but taking down trees. It's a huge, I think it's the elephant in the room, quite honestly.
Definitely. I feel like most people and most tree wardens and arborists that I've talked to, they cite budget as one of the number one kind of issues that they're facing. So
yeah,
you're not alone in thinking that. But I know I climbed for a year and I don't want to do it again. So
yeah.
What Rada used to do.
yeah. So if there's no other questions, I mean, I think these folks shotgunned a lot of information at all of you also. It might take you a little bit to digest it. I'll give you whatever they send me and you have their contact information, but I think we'll cut them loose and we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming to present. I think it was amazing. And thanks for everybody who wanted to come out and sit through this Zoom meeting. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person soon, as long as our guests aren't from out of state. So I look forward to seeing you all.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks.
Thank
See
you.
you, Becky.
See you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye, Pam.